ambient music is incredibly heavy. It's just heavy without guitar. It's heavy in terms of its intensity, its emotional intensity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Belgian Jasper. If this is your first time on the channel, hit subscribe right now. You might know Leila Abdul-Rauf from some quite extreme bands like Vastum, but she also has her solo albums in which she really explores heavy ambient soundscapes. She has a new album and I sat down with Leila to learn all about it. Leila, I'm talking to you on the eve of your new album. You look extremely relaxed and calm. What's going on underneath the surface, even with all the albums and all the projects that you've worked on, releasing an album is always an exciting moment. So tomorrow's the big day. What's going on right now for you?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. So this album, it's been a long time in the making. I started it, I think, in late 2019, and then finished it during lockdown last year. Yeah. So, so this is my pandemic album, and so it was a totally, maybe not totally, but somewhat different process than the first three albums in my solo discography, and there was just a lot of self-discovery, a lot of digging down deep into the unconscious, the wounds of my past, and just trying to integrate it all into some kind of story.
In the stripped down sound that you bring on this album, there is, to your point, a lot of depth and a lot of story behind. There's a lot to unpack, and I want to do that. I want to go into that. Before we do that, I want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, the name of the album, Phantasiai, a term from ancient Greek philosophy, really. Trusting your senses more than your thought or perception, what you can actually see. Maybe also in a more liberal way of translating it. And I did do some ancient Greek and Latin in school. Doing what feels right could be a way of interpreting as well. What does the term mean to you?
Okay, I'll give you a disclaimer now that I am not a student of Hellenistic philosophy, but this term came about in my psychoanalytic circles. So okay. I work at a psychoanalytic institute in California, and so I get to read all sorts of cool stuff that's part of the curriculum there. And so when I came across the term Phantasiai, with the sort of straightforward definition of the space that exists between sensation and thoughts, it immediately spoke to me, because that's where for me composition and creativity lie within that space. It's something that's inchoate, so it's not something that's necessarily a fully realized entity. It's sitting there somewhere in between not knowing and knowing.
Very fluid.
What's that?
Very fluid, like changing.
It's very changing. Yes, it's very very dynamic and fluctuating, and so that's that. When I came across that, I was like, that's the name of my next album. after the second album, Insomnia from 2015, I definitely got into a groove and, you know, achieved a certain amount of confidence that I didn't have to necessarily bounce ideas off of people all the time, that I could just go with my, you know, with my, go with my gut, so to speak, and really follow through on an idea and not necessarily, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like when you run something by someone, you're in some way asking permission to do something. And and after a while I was like, well, I want this to be my own space. I don't really need, you know, a whole lot of guests on the record, or kind of, and some people thrive off of that. And I that's why I have bands, is, you know, I love collaboration, but this is really my space to just do everything on my terms, and kind of be in this in this almost like womb of isolation. Like it's there's something comforting. There's also something very claustrophobic about it too. So it's sort of like this sort of satisfying pain in a way, to just withdraw deep within yourself and see what's in there, and you never know what you're going to find.
All more stuff that we need to unpack when we talk about the actual content of the new album. Before we do that, I wanted to just ask one more thing. Yes, you play in a lot of bands. You are not just playing in bands, you are in many cases a driving factor in those bands as well. People that follow your career, they know that you play with some of the heaviest bands around. On your own albums, you do a completely different thing, where you're more in the ambient wave, and on this album, it's, you know, we hear trumpets and glockenspiel that we're not going to hear that on a Vastum album anytime soon, or maybe we do, I don't know. Do you find that you have very different people that come to you for different things, or are there do you have a lot of people that come check out your own stuff that discovered you through those bands? And the reason why I ask is, I find, especially when you look at extreme metal in bands that you play at, there tend to be two distinct kinds of fans. The very purist, my black metal band has to be a black metal band, my death metal band has to be a death metal band. But then you also see
that's the case in dark ambient too, by the way.
Okay. Well, because you see also a lot of artists that grew out of extreme metal really embracing the ambient, the avant-garde. Think of like Catafalque, think about to some extent Izan from Emperor. Like there's a lot of examples where people kind of took that individualistic mantra of extreme metal and took it to a completely different direction. Do you see that do you see distinct fan groups, or do you actually see a lot of people that are happy to kind of blend the lines, if you will?
Yeah, I would say there's a very, very tiny overlap between people that follow Vastum and my solo material. And I say for the most part, they are pretty distinct groups.
Yeah.
And I would say that the metal fan base is larger overall than the experimental ambient crowd.
Yeah.
And that I would say in general, metal's just a little more accessible in some ways, even though it's so strange to call Vastum accessible, because we're really not in a lot of ways. But in some ways we are. It's like the riffs are catchy, the songs don't go on for a really long time, or there's, you know, you can mosh at a show and really like feel it in that way. But yeah, it's you know, it's something I think I'm seeing more and more overlap. I think as time goes on, people are becoming more open-minded and experimenting in other genres that they might not have 5 to 10 years ago.
Okay, so let's talk about, you know, the music on the new album. I've had a chance to really explore it, and it is an interesting ride to go through. It's not. This is not a collection of songs. This is really one body of work, but I should say maybe divided into two specific parts. In the first part, you mentioned going down, a deep dark hole of finding yourself, and I know that it's music that pulls you in, and kind of showcases addictions and almost like a mental slavery to some extent. And then on the second half, you have the eventual rebirth, or maybe getting clean, with lots of withdrawal symptoms. Is that am I getting into the right area? What's the story that you wanted to portray?
That's so interesting that you see it that way, and I think it's because when I wrote up the press release, I used the word addictive in a certain context, and I think for a lot of people, addiction is a certain thing. Certain things come to mind. It's hitting rock bottom and coming clean and becoming improved in some way. That's not necessarily the vantage point I was coming from. Fortunately, I don't suffer from addiction issues. I think what I was going for here was an addictive fantasy, addictive thoughts. Mm-hmm. We're not just addicted to substances. We're addicted to certain aspects of living that that we don't know how to survive without. But maybe we should. Maybe we should take away the crutches and be uncomfortable and stand on our own feet, even if it's painful. So that's where I was coming from with that, and the rebirth, which starts side 2 of the album. The I emerges, as in the self I, not the seeing I. Is more. It's like going through a painful channel, like a crucible. Like if you think about it almost in a religious context, it's like your day of judgment, and all your sins are being burned beneath you. So in a way it's like that, and when you come out of it, your psychic state is in this unrecognizable form. Mm-hmm. So it's uncomfortable, but it's also a place of growth and knowledge that you come into.
And what I found was very interesting was, because obviously also like the name of it, there's 2 parts, but in each part there are specific song. Every side of the album is 4 songs building one bigger work of art, based on titles as well. There's some hints there, but it's interesting for me that in this story, to your point, that when you go through that and that rebirth piece, in a lot of cliched stories, it's people go through a terrible struggle, get reborn, and then they are in bliss or something like that. Where in this case, the rebirth piece is, as a listener, the more uncomfortable piece of all, where the going down the dark path is the music is more upbeat or catchy to some extent, and it pulls you more in. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of put those upside down, that like, well, in order for you to get out on the other end in as a new person, or rediscover it yourself, that is not necessarily like just means okay, now everything is rainbows, lollipops, and sunshine, but it takes a lot out of you. Are there specific things that this is inspired on in that you want to share, that you feel like that you can share about, or is this really more all conceptual?
There are personal inspirations to this story. Relationships that haven't succeeded. And I loved what you said about sort of the rebirth section being the less comfortable, and as compared to the first side of the record, which is, you said was catchier, which it is in sort of a strange way, but it's like the darker side too. And side 2 is the more disorienting, and you start to see the light filter through, but at the end you're still haunted by this new configuration and by hints of your past self putting through. And when I write, I take aspects of one track and I might repurpose it into another in a different context, and and you would notice that on the second side of the album.
For me, this is an album that forces the listener to slow down and to take a lot in. And you either do that by overthinking about everything you hear and try to analyze everything, or not do that at all and just let go and kind of see where everything takes you. I feel like there's no in between there. It has to be either a super active, listening experience, or you let it take you on a journey, which is in stark contrast to today's, instant entertainment world, where, maybe not so much still in the alternative or the hard rock and metal world, but we're in a lot of the entertainment. It's not even songs anymore. This is the new sound on TikTok that lasts for 20 seconds, and that's popular right now. Is that just a byproduct of the art that you make, or is that somewhat a statement or a message that you want to bring?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much a conscious statement. But I definitely agree that this music is not for the short attention span.
Yeah.
And that said, I intentionally create soundscapes with plenty of space. I keep it minimal to just a few instruments. Space is something that's underutilized in a lot of music. It's better to listen to it on headphones. The headphones or surround system gives you that three-dimensional quality to the composition that might be lacking in different contexts. But with this music, I want to give space to that horn part. You really hear it. It really sinks in.
Yeah.
You have time to absorb it. Whereas, playing, 100 guitar notes a minute, it's impressive in a different way, but it's sometimes with the more accessible forms of music, it can be a little more superficial, where you're not letting it sink in. You're not really understanding what's going on inside of you when you listen to it necessarily, or you have a delayed response.
Right.
And so that's important, taking the time to really absorb each tone, texture. Where is it? Is it in front of you? Is it behind you? Is it off to the distance? Is it really close up? And these are the dimensions I try to use as sort of another instrument in the writing process. So
with all that in mind, and given that there is that story that the music is telling, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I find that this album is the most cinematic of your solo albums so far, which would lend itself really well to a visual art as well. I know that you've done some video clips in the past, but would you ever, and then maybe you've already done that in previous works, I'm not sure, but I find that this music would work really well as part of a audio and visual art piece, in a museum, in an exhibition, what have you. I'm not talking about a show, but something that you would create and leave, if you will. Is that something that you think about doing at one point? Would you like to turn your music into visual art as well? Or because you also said that you like people to have their own interpretation, do you want to stay away from that because of that reason?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to that.
Sorry.
Yeah, in the audio format only, you just have the audio. You have the cover. Now that's what's interesting, is that the cover, which is a painting by my friend Matt Jaffe, who's a credible painter. That was the first. That image was the beginning of writing the album. So that
okay.
So I had that image in my head before writing any of the songs, and then I had that image. I had the name Phantasiai, and I thought, what does this album sound like? And then that was my approach. Mm-hmm. Just filling it in as I kept thinking about, okay, what is this image saying to me in a musical context? So that's the first thing. So there's always a visual component to my composition. I always have, I put a lot of effort in reaching out to artists that can realize a certain image, vision, and there's always a strong relationship between that and the music. Also, when I perform live, most of the time it's with video projections, mm-hmm. and so that filmic aspect is always there, whether I'm performing live or thinking about composing. Whether the music would work for soundtracks, absolutely. I think all of the albums would, in a different way. I think Phantasiai might come across as more cinematic to people because it's very neoclassical in a way that I think the previous works weren't. So I think it has more in common with like Stravinsky than, maybe Brian Eno or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a heaviness. I remember before you were talking about, you play all these, you play in all these extreme metal bands. They're so heavy, but this is not as heavy. And I actually disagree and think that ambient music is incredibly heavy. It's just heavy without guitar. It's heavy in terms of its intensity, its emotional intensity. You can create dark atmospheres that go far beyond what a metal band can do, and a lot of metal bands take dark ambient aspects and infuse them in their songs. That's what gives them that dark atmosphere a lot of the time. So so there's so much interwoven between dark ambient and extreme metal.
Yeah. In a normal year, you already have to kind of, divide up your time between your solo work and all the stuff you do with all your bands. Now that there's been a gap for everybody to perform, it's going to be probably even harder for you to carve out time for everything and support everything in the way that you want it to do. Now, do you have already some plans that you can share? Are you looking to do some shows to promote the solo album, or are your bands going to take more of your time right now?
They're both going to take precedence starting next year. I already have 2 gigs booked, one with Vastum and one me solo. So the solo show will be my record release show at Northwest Terrorfest in Seattle next July. And I am looking forward to playing live again. However, I have to say that right when the lockdown happened, I got pretty burnt out on performing live. I was doing it quite a bit. And I was dividing my my time between like 5 different projects playing live. So I really appreciated this long, unbroken time to really get into recording and not have any interruptions. So I didn't really miss performing live when I was doing it. And now it's kind of like, oh, I got to play live again. I have to get back into that space again. It feels like it's going to, you know, I have all this inertia I have to get past to get up and running again. And, you know, usually I perform live with one or two other people, and I have to sort out who that's going to be and how that's going to work. Translating the new material, you know, because I really purposefully try to not replicate the recording live. I think that's almost cheating the audience. Like, I want to give the audience a new experience. I want them to recognize the themes in the record, but I want them to just not know what to expect when I play live. So there's a lot of improvisation that happens, and instrumental and lyrical. So I don't even know what's going to come out of my mouth sometimes, but that's exciting. And so these next few months, I have to sort of get back into that flow. Okay,
awesome. Well, we'll keep following you on every platform out there and making sure that we know what's going on, when it's going to happen. Leila, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Super excited about the new music. It can be uncomfortable at times, but I find it's an amazing journey to go on. So really, really excited for you to release the album tomorrow. And thank you again for being here today with me.
Thanks so much, Jasper. I appreciate you listening.
You are awesome for watching this video. Click right here to see more content like it and subscribe to the channel.